Veronique, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. We'd love for you to take a few minutes to make some opening comments, and then we'll go to questions.
Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone. So today I was asked to talk to you about issues of the debt ceiling, and spending, I guess, as they're all very, very intimately related. And I thought it'd be actually a good idea to start briefly with why we care about the debt. There are a lot of people, and especially the years before the pandemic, there was a lot of very serious, actually, academics, shortly on the center left, but serious academics nonetheless, actually making a very, I guess, attractive case that the debt doesn't matter. And mostly it rested on this idea that interest rate had been very low for a very long time. And as such, as long as the economy kept growing and growing and growing, and certainly grew at a rate that was higher than interest rates, then we could borrow our heart away and we'd be fine. Now, it's funny what 2 years really does, because in 2021, there were still a lot of people making this argument coming out of COVID, arguing that we should be actually jacking up spending, or at the very least continuing to spend at the COVID pace. Just to give you an idea, President Biden took that very much to heart, as his budget recently proposed is basically increasing spending by 55% over 2019, the 2019 levels. What that means is that coming out of COVID, him and his team decided that there was no point doing what every president had done before, which is that you spend a lot during an emergency and then you reduce after the emergency is over. And he was going to actually continue at the same pace and in fact increase above that level. So we know now, as I would have liked us to know before, that this notion that interest rates would never go up was always an illusion. It was always wishful thinking. But let's actually kind of review under the best circumstances. Let's put ourselves back in the day, so long ago, 2019 or 2020, when interest rates were indeed low. Is there actually a case for the debt doesn't matter if rates are low? I'd argue that no, it really doesn't. First, so there are a few reasons. The first main reason, in my opinion, if you're a conservative, if you're a free market like I am, is that debt is the symptom of overspending. There's an enormous literature about how government spending, actually the return on government spending, contrary to what people say, is very, very detrimental to growth. And even in the best case scenario, you have to have very, 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 very specific conditions that are rarely obtained for a dollar of government spending, which, by the way, doesn't fall from the sky, has to be taken from the real economy, either in the form of borrowing or in the form of taxing, to actually turn in economic growth above this $1. So in most cases, you spend $1 and you get less than $1. So to begin with, it's not a very good deal. The other thing that's important is, while a lot of conservatives, for instance, Democrats, progressive, don't care about even measuring the size of government. They want more government. They want bigger government. But conservatives, who often, argue that the size of government matters, rightfully so, they tend to measure taxes, the tax level. And like Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize in economics, that argue that actually, It's actually really the spending that matters. That's what you should keep your eyes on. And when you have a lot of debt, again, the symptom of overspending, it means that the size of your government is really important. The other thing, which is an economic reality, that large debt lead in the future to higher taxes, with all the problems that causes. And there's a profound unfairness to that, because think about it. We're spending a lot of money that we don't have for current generation, and we're committing future generation to shoulder the burden of a spending that they haven't approved. In my opinion, this is a profound, it's profoundly unfair. And I wished, there were more young people that would, revolt against this. And so it's not just that government spending and that is not effective, but it's also profoundly immoral. Now, let's talk about interest rates. Even if interest rates remain low, the more debt you accumulate, the higher the interest payment. That stays true, even if interest rates remain relatively flat. In fact, when you actually look at the projection before this recent increase in interest rates from this Congressional Budget Office, looking at how much interest on the debt, interest payment on the debt we're going to have to pay, it went from roughly 2% of GDP to 8% in GDP in 2050. 8% of GDP spent exclusively on interest payment. That would be 40%. That's back in the day, 40% of revenue. That means that you start having, even if interest rates are low, you start having this vicious cycle where you spend money you don't have, you have to borrow, that increases the amount of interest payment that you borrow and consume more of your revenue, meaning that you have to turn to borrowing even more, and it's a vicious cycle. So basically, debt is expensive. We all know it, but for whatever reason, it seems people think that because it's the government, it doesn't really matter. And the final point, which is really overlooked, unfortunately, is the fact that debt in and of itself, not just government spending, but debt in and of itself, past a certain point, actually constitutes a drag on the economy, right? When that point is, we don't know. I mean, there are studies that say 90% of gross to GDP, debt to GDP level, and we're past this, by the way. But there's, we don't know where it is, but we know for a fact that that countries with large debt, after a certain point, we can observe a drag on economic growth. And there's really nothing that's more important for building wealth, intragenerational wealth, income mobility, and all of this than economic growth. And finally, I guess I will say that there's a moment where you have so much debt that when you have an emergency, when you have to respond to national security threat, when you have to respond to a pandemic, when you have to respond to anything, you're going to end up having less money to devote. And every additional debt that you take on could lead you to more inflation, for instance, and a potentially debt crisis. And that leads me to today, and then I will be quiet, which is what we've learned, obviously, that this notion that interest rates will never go up is as I've mentioned before, is just completely nonsense. Interest rates can go up. Sometimes they go up for like right now, they go up as a response to the Federal Reserve fighting inflation. Sometimes they go up for external forces, but they always come up because at some point investors look at you at some point and they say, you know what? This debt doesn't seem to be it seems to be riskier today than it was tomorrow. And in that case, what investors do is they ask a risk premium in the form of a higher interest rate. And when that starts happening, you can have a real interest problem. There's a final point. It's like government spending and excessive Fed printing of money during the pandemic caused inflation. When you have inflation, you're faced with investors worrying, especially if the Fed is not responding fast enough and trying to get rid of inflation. You're always faced with 30% of our debt, 30% of our debt as a maturity of 1 year. And what you risk effectively is those short-term investors who basically get lend money and know they're going to be repaid in the next year, not in 30 years, but in the next year. They may actually look at inflation and really worry that they're going to be paid back with money that is devalued, significantly devalued. And in that case, what you may end up doing, especially on that much money, we're talking $6 trillion, you may have a short-term debt crisis where those investors either decide to pull back their money, or the next time around, after they're paid back, they're going to say, you know what, too risky, or they're going to ask for a higher premium. And that's how you could actually get a debt crisis in time of inflation. And the bigger the debt, the bigger the crisis, and it could go really fast. And that's about it. I could go on forever, but I just want to.
No, that's a great overview of the dangers and all the problems with living in a culture of debt and the way our country has been accumulating debt over the years. And Janine, I know you've got some great questions lined up, and so we'd like to go to you and then go on over to the students.
Okay, thank you so much. Gosh, my mind is sort of twirling with all the different things to talk about. I mean, there's the upcoming, I'm just going to kind of throw them out there for a second. There's the upcoming debt ceiling. They're going to be dealing with that in Congress. It might be interesting to explain to our students that are watching what the debt ceiling is and why that matters. There's also the debt and the deficit, and I think one of those is an extraordinary number that's just incredibly high. And also there's the gross national product that usually offsets the spending, but that's not happening anymore. I think we're kind of in pre-World War II. Did I hear that? I don't know. But I think that what's interesting to me I have a 25-year-old daughter, and it's very hard, except for these exceptional, I think my daughter's exceptional, but the exceptional students on this and young adults on this panel. But it's very hard for, I think, the youth to understand why this matters, because it doesn't seem to actually touch anybody. And, I quote George Washington all the time. And the problem with the democracy is you have to feel it before you can understand it. And so there's all this thing going around, like, don't use TikTok. When everyone's like, well, how's China really going to hurt me? And it's kind of the same thing with the debt and the deficit. People just think we'll raise taxes. And I'll raise my taxes. I don't have a problem raising my taxes. Well, when you're out there in the real world and you're having to, provide and take care of families and really provide for yourself, it becomes a problem. And I know that you know a lot about France. And I think that their taxes are 85% or something crazy in Paris, and people are leaving because it's just impossible. You can speak to that, I guess, to live. But and now they're revolting because they're having to cut back on social security, I guess, or whatever is happening over there. But I guess my main question is, it just seems so mind-boggling, and the youth think, well, it's not affecting me, and then we bail out these banks for who put in so much money above what's federally insured, and now we're actually paying all that off. We, the taxpayers, are paying their over their accounts that had, I don't know, millions and millions of dollars in them, and now we're responsible for it, which shouldn't be the case. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any sort of accountability. So here are my questions. Can you explain to the students why interest rates matter? And can you, what that even really means? Like raising interest rates is terrible, but how? And can you explain how it touches the individual citizen? That yeah, you can raise your taxes, but also there are never enough of taxes that are going to be able to take care of this. You could tax 100% everybody in America. You can't pay off all this debt. And the third thing is the danger that we are in with foreign countries, which have people who own our debt. So I get those kind of three things. It's a very complicated issue, but the debt, the deficit, and interest rates. I think the youth just think, well, this doesn't affect me. I'm still, my life is great. So to kind of narrow that down a little bit, but also the upcoming debt ceiling, why that matters in Congress right now, that we just keep raising it and raising it and raising it. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. So sorry if that was completely confusing,
No.
but it's because it is confusing.
We haven't had, so a deficit is basically the difference between the tax collected every year and the money we spent. The money we spent is a mix of money that was approved the year before and money and spending that was approved many years before. So for instance, like you have every year decisions on how much to pay for the federal government will pay for schools or transportation, but decisions about programs that are paying benefits every year, like Social Security, for instance, these are decisions and laws that and spending decisions that were made many years ago. So it's always a mix. How much we spend in a given year is always a mix of decision of the past and decision that we make today. So when we have a deficit, it means that we're spending more than than we've collected in taxes. And of course, the debt is a total. They accumulate the sum of all the deficits we've accumulated over the years. As I said, right, interest rates matter.
What is that debt right now? How many trillions is the
almost $32 trillion? So 32
trillion
plus 12 zeros.
It's the highest in history, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's been at the chair as a chair. It's only going like this, and especially because it's problematic right now because we're not at war, and now we have economic problems. We're coming out of a crisis, but the truth of the matter is, if you looked at our debt trajectory before COVID, our debt trajectory was upward. And it was a product of a lot of the decisions that were made when Congress and past administration decided to spend on essentially three big programs. Social Security, which is retirement for people above 65, or seniors, that call them senior because they're different age that you can become eligible for Social Security. Medicare, which is healthcare reimbursement for, again, senior, and Medicaid, which is healthcare costs for lower income people. And part of those three programs are driving the cost of our debt and the cost of our future debt. And interest, when you add interest payment to all of this, it's a pretty explosive mix. So to give you an idea, those Social Security, Medicare, and interest payments since 2009 have basically made up 89% of our spending. It's just an enormous amount. That's where the money goes. So when you hear people talking about how, oh, if only we could cut foreign aid, or if we could abolish even the Department of Education and the Department of Energy, then would be, well, it wouldn't make a dent precisely because of these decisions that they made. So we are.
But is Social Security not even solvent? It's going to. They don't even have enough money in it. They borrow the Social Security to go pay other things, don't they? I mean, I think that's interesting for all of us.
So there's all these money that we've committed to that we don't have the money for, but things are about to actually get much worse, in part because until now, for the most part, it's not exactly true when it comes to Social Security. It's changed a little bit since 2010. For the most part, these programs, Social Security and Medicare in particular, they were not entirely paying for themselves, but almost, because they had taxes that were allocated for them. Now, the burden on the economy, no, the fact that a program is paid for with earmarked taxes doesn't diminish the burden on the economy on the tax side and on the spending side. That said, what's going to happen as close as in the next 5 years, and for Social Security, for Medicare, and 9 years for Social Security, is that we're going to hit a point where, I won't bore you with the details, but where the mechanism so far that was contributing to paying most of the benefits for these programs is going to dry out. It's going to go away, which is going to require, basically, if Congress doesn't change the law, is going to require a cut in benefits for Social Security above 20% across the board. Congress is not going to let that happen. And what likely it's going to do is going to actually take money from the income tax and other source of revenue and transfer it to that program. It will do two things. First, it will turn this Social Security, whether people want it or not, eventually into a welfare program. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that, but most of the popularity of our Social Security comes from the fact that it's a universal, that people feel they've paid for it, even though they haven't. They actually pay for current workers. And what it's also going to do is it's going to actually take a lot of the revenue, consume a lot of the revenue that we're collecting for in theory for other things, and push it towards these programs. To give you an idea, with interest payment on the debt, those two programs, the shortfall of these two programs, meaning the difference between how much it's going to have to come out and how much we are collecting, is going to be 116 trillion shortfall. And that's for Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the debt. So it's really significant. Now, where do interest rates come in all of this? Again, when you borrow money, you have to convince people, right, to lend you this money. They're not going to say, okay, well, just take it and then you give it to me, in a year or in 10 years or in 3 years, or whatever, or in 30 years, right? They're going to say, but in exchange, you're going to pay me a premium for actually lending you that money, for the fact that I have postponed the use of that money for myself, and all the stuff I could have spent it on. And so that's the interest rate, right? And so far, the interest rate was really low, historically low. We can just discuss whether it was because of the Fed or different factors like demographics, but either way, it had been Fed. It had been really low. The problem is that it had been very low, and people believed that it was going to stay very low forever, either because people would always want to buy foreign countries. You asked about foreign countries would always want to hold US debt because it's seen as a safe asset that is unlikely to default. And or because and whether it's private or public, or because we would the government through the Fed or other ways would never let interest rates go up, or just people just simply forgot that interest rate, they fluctuate, right? They kind of like believe that it would never change. And the problem is, as I said, is like when you have a lot of debt, you end up still on that debt having to pay interest on the rate on the debt. And when those interest rates go, so even if they don't move, the larger the debt, the more the interest you have to pay on the debt. That has to come from somewhere, right? And either you pay it for the revenue you collect, or then you have to borrow it again. And it's a vicious cycle. So you add to the debt as you pay for your interest on the debt. But if interest on the debt, if interest rates go up, then it goes up exponentially. Now, where does the debt ceiling comes in? We have a statute that actually requires that there's a limit on how much we can borrow. It's not a permanent limit. It just means that when Treasury hits a certain amount of borrowing, it has to go to Congress to ask for permission to raise the debt limit and to borrow more. In the last 10 years, that limit has been used as a means to have a conversation about the fact that we can't go on like this, borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and that this is a good opportunity to ask for concession. And this is the crisis. This is what's going on right now.
Okay, that's amazing. I want to make sure everybody has time to ask a question, so I have to pass. But you really answered those questions well. I mean, that was a lot of stuff I threw at you. That was very impressive. Can you answer a question in like 10 seconds though? Because I want to make sure everybody has time. So just like very, very quick answer. When you say people were borrowing money to pay all of our debt, it's really striking that 89% or whatever you said of all of our spending goes to those programs. That doesn't leave much for national defense and all the infrastructure and all the other things we might need. But my specific 10-second question is, when you say we're borrowing to pay the debt, from whom are we borrowing? I think that's really good for everybody to know.
So we're borrowing, so a small part of it, which is shrinking, is called intragovernmental debt. It's the debt. It's the money that the government borrows to other part of the government, like for instance, the Social Security Trust Fund. But that's small, and it's shrinking because that's the part that's going to be gone by 2023, for the most part. Otherwise, we borrow from private investors, foreign and domestic. And the Federal Reserve, by the way, is a growing holder of U.S. debt. So we always make. I mean, the main. I haven't looked in a while, but the main holder of U.S. debt are domestic agent, but there's a fair amount of U.S. debt that is held, by countries in countries' central banks, including or private or foreigners like China and Japan. I think Japan is the top one, and at the top you always have Japan, China, Germany, and other countries. So it's a mix of sometimes.
That's really interesting.
Private.
I could ask so many more questions on that, like who are the private companies, but I'm going to toss to Tova. And Tova, it loves diplomacy, and she looks so tired because I know she's in finals right now at Harvard. Right, Tova? Are you in finals? But Tova, you probably love that. It's an interesting thing to think about, the foreign governments taking on our debt, and how that affects foreign diplomacy. If Japan, that how you deal with other countries if they hold so much of our debt. Okay, Tova, I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you. I could talk to you forever, Veronique, but I have to share. Veronique, I have to share. Go ahead, Tova.
Yeah, thanks so much, Janine, and thank you for being on. This is really fascinating. And I was curious how the size of the US debt compares to that of other countries. So, a lot of other countries seem to have very large social safety nets. Do they also have comparable levels of debt? And how do they manage that compared to the United States?
So different countries have different size of debt, but we're all very indebted now, especially coming out of COVID. So our debt to GDP is roughly 100%. So in our entire, so our debt as a share of our economy is roughly 100%. That's ignoring the part that the federal government owes, again, to other parts of the federal government. Japan has an enormous amount of debt. It's above 200%. And people always point to Japan saying, see, we shouldn't worry because Japan, they are doing fine. Well, actually, they're not doing fine. Do you remember what I told you? One of the problem with the debt is that in and of itself, at some point, it starts creating a drag on the economy. If there's an economy that hasn't been growing, I mean, we called it the lost decade in Japan for a reason. They've had negative wage growth. They're just like, it causes a lot of problem. The other thing where we shouldn't actually also be comparing Japan to the US so much is because our intragovernmental debt is a lot of what Japan has, and ours is really small. So it means that they are, but they're not as much as we are, basically subjected to the whim and the assessment of our financial health of private investors, and domestic and foreign. And so we are, in a lot of ways, until recently, I would have said, until 2007, I would have said that actually we were some of the relatively low debt to GDP country nations. In 2007, our debt to GDP was 35%, right? But now, there's just a lot of most of the countries, a lot of the countries you can name or you'll think of, or like France, they're, especially coming out of COVID, they're in the like 90 or 100 territory. So we're all in a pretty bad shape.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And then I was curious about you personally, as somebody who's from France and was educated in France. How do you think the experience of having that French background has helped you conceptualize the economic state of the United States? And have you seen any major differences in the economic policies between the two?
I wish there were more differences. So I came here in '99, hoping to escape the bad government policy of France. And ever since I've come here, just to give you an idea, when I started working at the Cato Institute in 2001, the federal government was spending $1.8 trillion. The federal government, right? It's spending over $6 trillion. So considering that my job is to actually fight against government spending, it's kind of a miracle that I have a job, because I have not been doing my job really well. But so, and ever since, I've kind of realized the US was on the bad path. And by the way, one of the ways that governments get in a bad start developing really bad spending habit and accumulating debt is when we have an emergency. So I started in 2001. We had 9/11. Then we had the financial crisis. Now we've had COVID, right? And ever since that time I started working, I've been just fighting in hope that we wouldn't become more like France. And unfortunately, a lot of the rhetoric on the right and on the left makes me think these days more than ever that we're closer to adopting the kind of welfare system with the expanded child tax credit, with federal paid leave, with things like this, to European countries and France in particular.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then on this note of the sort of geopolitical order, I was curious how this debt crisis within the US might, affect the balance of power in the world. Does this give more power to other countries, like, for example, China? Or is, as you mentioned before, is this sort of a crisis that's just affecting a lot of the world and isn't necessarily like shifting the financial power that's held?
Well, so let me just say this. The best way to remain a superpower and their number one superpower in the world is to adopt free market policies and to clean our financial house. That's the number one way. If we are adopting policies, if we're addressing our risk of fiscal insustainability, and we adopt free market policies, and we don't turn ourselves into the welfare state that we've seen in a lot of other countries, we will stay a number one superpower, because we'll allow for investors to invest, so people to save, for innovators to innovate, for the economy to grow, and all of this. There's no better way to stay a superpower. As for what's happening right now, I think actually, because we're not doing this, it is a threat. Now, I will moderate and bring a caveat to my comments. It's like, as it turns out, as it happens, most other countries are always worse than we are. They always have, I mean, there's no chance that Europeans are ever gonna, overtake us. And as for China, I think it's going to be harder and harder, considering the serious left turn, and the real extreme central planning that we're seeing on with China since 2012. I think it's going to be harder in the next 5 years to make the case that China is doing so great. We've seen it. They have lower economic growth than they were. They have a demographic problem. They are starting to have entitlement and retirement spending problems. And because they have been so top down, I think these problems, especially on the economic front, are going to continue. You've seen basically like the Chinese government having these debates right now about whether they should continue this heavy-handed policy of subsidizing semiconductor and solar panels and all of these, and whether and which effectively is basically saying, well, we've tried industrial policy, it's just not working as well. Maybe we left our foot off the pedal for at least this part of it. So I may be wrong. In 5 years you may want to email me, but I think that kind of the fear we've had of China becoming this incredible superpower that has more growth and more wealth and lift more people out of poverty and is going to be hard to make in the next 5 years. And besides, you can hardly achieve all these things if you're effectively an authoritarian regime.
Well, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. That was a really fascinating discussion. And now I will
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. And now I'll gladly pass on to Lindsay for some more questions.
Thank you, Tova. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very, very frightening topic, but it's important to be educated on it. So I appreciate you joining. But I think the question that is on a lot of our minds right now is there anything that can be done to discourage American government from borrowing and spending?
You guys can revolt. I mean, create a youth movement, educate your friends about the reality of our debt situation. Explain to them that an indebted economy is an economy that grows less fast. Enormous amount of debt means more taxes for you guys down the road. More taxes means a slower economy and higher unemployment, less innovation, less investment, all sorts of things. And it just, the scale of the commitment that we have made for seniors who are overrepresented in the top income quintile should be really alarming to young people. And it's not. Just when I say they're overrepresented in the top income quintile, let me explain what this means. Again, the reason why I'm focusing on Medicare and Medicaid is like they are really two of the main driver of our future debt, ignoring interest on the debt, which is becoming a significant part of our spending. When Social Security and Medicare were created, when people got old and had to retire or had to shoulder healthcare costs, usually they didn't have the means for it. They were represented, they were heavily represented in the bottom income quintile, because at the time we didn't have developed financial markets like we have today. There was in the US wasn't as rich as it is right now. We didn't, and so basically there wasn't a lot of savings, and seniors were, if you stopped, for a lot of seniors, if you stopped working, you were poor, right? This is not the case anymore. Again, I mean, it is worth repeating over and over again. Not every senior is rich. Many seniors are poor, but as a group, seniors are overrepresented. I don't know how to say it otherwise in the top income quintile. They're doing very well thanks to the market economy that has allowed them to not only save but also get tremendous interest on and return on those investments. And yet we have two programs that are predicated in making people eligible when they become seniors. It makes no sense, because what effectively it means is through your taxes. So younger people are overrepresented in the lower income quintile, and that is true even for you guys. When you're going to start, you're going to have fairly low incomes, right? You don't have any savings and all of this, and you still have to go through life saving for a house, saving for children, saving for college for your kids, saving all of this on top of saving for your retirement. So you're going to have to pay a tax, the payroll tax, which is regressive because it's a flat rate. And for what? To transfer a massive amount of wealth from the relatively young and poor to the relatively old and wealthy. And that is the reality you face, and that is a reality you shouldn't be accepting, because there is no better moment than now to actually talk about reforms for these two programs. Now, Social Security is a big problem, and for most of its existence, it's been the most amount of money the government has paid every year was for Social Security. But very quickly, healthcare costs and the growth in healthcare costs are starting to overtake absolutely everything else. So make no mistake, you guys will be paying for it, and there's no money. Even at the level of taxes that we're paying, which I can tell you is significant already, it is not enough money. That 12.4% for Social Security taxes that is collected, and 15 point something, 3%, 15.3, I think, for Social Security and Medicare is only the beginning. And it's right now only applying to not the totality of income and for higher income people. So it is the way these guys are going to resolve it is by increasing taxes and I hope, hopefully, reducing the benefits. So then we can actually, once it becomes, the reason why actually I said I'm comfortable with these programs becoming welfare programs, first is because, as I said, I want them to be means tested, because that age-based programs make no sense, as I've explained, because of how well off seniors are. But it's also because once you have a system that's means tested, we can actually have a conversation about whether to leave it this way.
That's right. And it's so frustrating when you get your first paycheck back, when you get that first job and you have that taken out for
Get used to it,
taxes.
because it's probably, I understand. And that's actually, you would think that, I wish young people would actually always look at their paycheck. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't. But I really wish, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you so much. I think I have to pass it on to audience questions.
Sorry, I went too long, but
No, that was great. So much information. It was wonderful. But thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and sharing all of this info to make people more aware of this issue.
thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, Lindsay and Tova and Janine, for your questions. Just a great discussion this afternoon. And we want to take a minute to welcome our listeners from Las Vegas Best News Radio, KKVV, AM 1060 in Las Vegas. Our program airs on Las Vegas KKVV Mondays at 6 p.m. Pacific. So you can listen online if you want to go back and hear the program. You can go to constitutingamerica.org to our archives and catch all our past programs there. We also have a homeschool family with us today, Katie Dice and her students. And one of Katie's students, Elisa, wants to know, how do we get out of debt? Is there any way to actually pay it off?
So this is an excellent question. And I can tell you, it's a question that I wish more people more people in Congress asked, but they don't. So you don't have to pay off the debt. We don't have to pay it off. But what we have to is make it sustainable, bring it back to a level where if interest rates all of a sudden go up, it doesn't put us in a situation where that's a crisis. We have to be able to continue responding to emergencies, whether they're military or, again, a pandemic or who had pandemic on their bingo card in 2019, right? When talking about emergencies, I certainly didn't. So you want to put in a place where it's sustainable, where basically investors are going to look at us and not worry that they're not going to be paid back, or they're going to be paid back with deflated money. Because that's another thing, is like a big contributor to the inflation that we've seen is not just the fact that we were spending money, but we were spending money that had part of it that had been printed. But for the first time, no one ever talked about repaying that debt. In 2020, during the Great Recession, even President Obama, he was saying, you know what, we're spending all this money later, but we're going to do austerity going forward. There's none of that going on right now. And that kind of talk worries investors, because they worry then that the way we're going to deal with our debt is with inflation, and that in and of itself, investors worrying about inflations, or Americans worrying about inflation tomorrow, means we have inflation today, because they start actually acting in a way to protect themselves against inflation. So we need to put ourselves on a sustainable path. The goal isn't to pay it off entirely. I would love if we paid it off, but that's out of question. What do we need to do? It's simple. We know what we need to do. It's hard politically. As I've said, the drivers of our future debt: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and because of that spending, that we don't have interest on our debt. We need to reform these. And the problem is no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about it. But one thing you need to know for sure is that not talking about it is not going to be an option for very long. Mark my words, there's going to be, in the next 10 years, a lot of talk about reforming Social Security. Why is that? It's because, as I said, in 2033, when the trust fund which holds some assets, which allow right now to pay all the benefits above and beyond what we collect in taxes, there will be no more assets in that trust fund. And when that happens, benefits are going to be cut. So whenever someone tells you we're not going to touch Social Security, not touching Social Security means not talking about it, means agreeing to cutting benefits by over 20%. I'm okay with cutting benefits. totally okay. But I would like to do it in a responsible manners that doesn't actually hurt those seniors that are actually truly dependent on Social Security.
Well, thank you. And great question from Elisa. And Robert Zimmerman asked about a Wall Street Journal article that I think came out March 2nd, 2023, default on the US debt is impossible. The article quotes the 14th Amendment that says the validity of the public debt in the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. And it says that the Supreme Court ruled held in Perry versus the US 1935 covers all sovereign federal debt, past, present, and future. And I think the point of the article is that in the debt ceiling negotiations, that when people say that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we'll default on the debt, that is not exactly a correct argument, because the 14th Amendment doesn't allow us to default on the debt. Could you talk a little bit just about that whole concept of the 14th Amendment, and but also on the debt ceiling negotiations that are going on?
I'm not a legal scholar, and I think kind of this this question of whether the Treasury is going to have to first pay interest on the debt because it's in the Constitution, I mean, is an argument that needs to be tested. But that said, I mean, if we have to go to court to figure it out, markets are going to panic. I can tell you this. So what I expect is that ultimately, Treasury will never let us default on interest payment, and even probably on our principal. It's not going to let us default precisely because they know the consequences, the quite dramatic consequences of not honoring interest payments. And so now if we don't raise the debt ceiling, I think we should get some sort of commitment in exchange for raising the debt ceiling. Or let me rephrase this. If Congress was sensible and fiscally responsible, it would make sense to them to say, you know what, we're raising the debt ceiling, but do not worry, we're going to actually attach some, let's say, spending caps. They don't have time for much more, like spending type to caps on the discretionary side. And then we're going to be talking about reforming entitlement down the road. They're not. So we're going to have to raise the debt ceiling, and I'm afraid that the concessions we're going to get are going to be very minimal. But again, even those concessions, even if we were going to get concession, it's only a matter of time that we need to raise the debt ceiling again, precisely because the spending on entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, is growing fast. Baby boomers are retiring, and it's going to continue growing fast. And we have a lot of our money, a lot of the money that the federal government raised, we're already overspending by a significant amount, $1.5 trillion. It was obviously $3 trillion during the pandemic, but $1.5 trillion now. And so things are not going to get better. And I think that there's a moment where if in the context of the debt ceiling, things become contentious, though they will be paying interest on the debt, they will be paying probably the principal. Investors may get also wigged out by the fact that we are that there's so much dysfunction and so much spendings that can be paid when the debt ceiling hit, and they haven't found a solution. So it's not a good situation, but I don't blame those who are trying to kind of get some concession. I wish, what I blame them for is like, where were they talking about government spending before the debt ceiling needed to be raised, right? I mean, fiscal responsibility is not once every 4-year type of exercise. It's you have to have fiscal hygiene. You have to actually not constantly agree to spend money you don't have above and beyond, and with growing deficits, and and so that's what really bothers me. But the debt ceiling is going to be resolved. It always gets resolved, but it's going to get harder and harder and harder.
Well, thank you. And we're right at the top of the hour. Janine, do you have any closing comments or questions?
I always have a quick closing question. Yes, this has been really terrific. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Very quickly, because we're essentially, if we were on TV, we'd be cutting to commercial break right now. But you've just been simply terrific. When you two things, it seems to me like what's happening in Paris right now with the revolt against Macron actually doing something about Social Security without the legislative voting on it, is what I understand, and everyone's revolting against that. That's kind of a dire situation that we might be up against, I guess, that's happening over there. Maybe not. I really don't know exactly. I kind of see snippets on the news. But my main question is, when you say Social Security has become a welfare, what state type of thing, that Social Security, what do you mean by that? That's my question.
So when they start transferring general fund money to start paying for Social Security, then they open up the possibility every single year of renegotiating that part of the benefit that are paid for with general revenues. Right now, unless Congress goes and changes the law on the mandatory side and say, we're going to make reforms to Social Security, right? Until in 2030, it's kind of on autopilot, where the payroll tax is collected, the Social Security takes some of the assets from the trust fund, goes to Treasury and say, give us our money so we can pay the entirety of benefits in that given year. And no one really is ever forced to look at it. It's happening in the background, and it's happening until there's no more of that money. Once you start transferring money from the general fund every year, it's going to have to be appropriated. It's going to have, the rules are going to be different. People are going to have a say on the way that money is spent, because it's not going to be on the background anymore.
Okay, and that's what you mean by welfare. I didn't know if you meant that
Yeah.
not everybody's going to get their money.
And also
only
because they're going to start. And also because they're going to start, right? They're going to cut benefits. They're going to cut benefits, and it means that and they may decide to exclude eventually people above a certain amount of money, making about a certain amount of income. But it means is when that effectively becomes the difference between a welfare system and Social Security. It's universality, right? When you become 65, if you have the right amount of work, quarters and stuff, if you're eligible, I mean, most people receive Social Security, right? A welfare program, it doesn't. So when you start actually seriously excluding other people, I
see. I thought that's what you meant. So in other words, all of us who've been putting our money in all these years may not see it because,
Yeah. And for France, very quickly, the French were protesting very vigorously before Emmanuel Macron used what is kind of the equivalent of the executive order, an executive order. Basically, it's an article of the Constitution that allows him to go above the head of Congress to pass some stuff. It's worth saying that him doing this is actually constitutional, unlike President Biden loan forgiveness. So they were protesting, and it tells you the problem in France is very different than ours. I don't think we would get that level of protest if we were to raise the retirement age by 2 years, right? Especially from 62 to 64, which we are already past that, right? So the problem in France is literally that the government has been saying, and people have been believing, that we can continue spending money we don't have. We can continue giving these very generous benefits without any consequences. Well, it has consequences, because next year, S&P has warned the government of France that if they don't pass this retirement plan, this retirement reform, it's a baby retirement reform. They're going to downgrade the French debt. What does that mean? It means that it's signaling to people that it's not as safe as it used to be. They're going to ask for higher interest rates. The French interest payment on the debt is much smaller than us, but it's a much, much, much smaller country. It went from $30 billion in 2021, and is going to be $70 billion. It's growing fast, and it's growing fast in part because the European Central Bank, to fight inflation, has raised the rate from basically 0 to 3. Now, if they're downgraded, those rates are expected to go even more. So I don't know that Macron, as much as I disapprove of what he's done, especially because they've done a terrible job explaining why they needed to do it, I don't know that he had much choice.
Yeah, so it was actually kind of a good thing that he did. Yeah, I don't think I was making a comment about what was going on. It's just that
They're in a bad place.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you lie to people and you tell them that you're not going to touch Social Security, healthcare costs, and all this, and we couldn't go on forever, and the debt doesn't matter because interest rates are always going to stay low. It's not true.
Because eventually
reality hits you in the face.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've just been amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really, really, truly. Thanks for going overtime with us too. We were in overtime here.
No problem.
All right. Thank
you
you
so much. And we invite all of our audience back next week. We're going to be talking about FBI, CIA, Department of Homeland Security, what they all do, what the differences are. So we hope you join us. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thanks so much. Thanks, Veronique.